You're recording in progress. So this is the second installment of the lace jacket class. So as always, I'm going to turn on the video and ask me questions as we go along, because tonight we're going to be interlining. This is all the setup for next time where we start sewing all the seams together. Okay, so now I guess before we begin, do I have any questions? Yes, go ahead. Yeah, Marguerite.
So I watched the video again since I was an hour off.
That's okay.
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Hold on a second. It's my daughter calling me. And you talk about sewing the lace with the length of grain.
Okay.
But the length, this is the lace I have.
Mm-hmm.
So the length of grain would be crosswise, like this.
Yeah,
and I almost,
you could cut it with the stripes running vertically.
Well, that's what I was wondering, because to me it seems like it's better across the grain.
Yeah, I agree. See, and that's the beauty of really a lot of different kinds of laces. They don't hang quite the same as a woven fabric.
Okay.
So yes, I would run it, have your pattern pieces cut across the grain so that the stripes run vertically on your body.
Okay, and then this is the edge. Whoopsie, can you see it?
The selvage, yeah.
Salvage, yes, thank you. The salvage.
Yes.
You would still rather I bind the edge?
Well, see, that's something you can make a choice. If you like the selvage, you could go ahead and use the selvage as your finish.
Okay.
And so what you might try to do is lay it out so that the selvage is the hem of the garment as well as maybe the cuffs.
Yeah, okay.
But you're going to have to bind some of it. But I know in the last class, we had several people who used the selvage as the finish along the bottom and then did the binding kind of up and around the fronts and the neck.
Okay.
So yeah, you have that option as well.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so other questions?
Mine's just a quick, simple one.
Okay.
I'd make a pattern envelope to keep all the pattern pieces together. Do you have a simple line drawing of what the jacket looks like?
Gosh, I don't.
I could tape it to the outside?
Not
if you don't, you don't.
Actually email me that, because I think somewhere in the emails I might have one. I can track one down.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought there was one on the page where we downloaded the pattern from. I thought that was one of the images.
That
or where
could
we
very
bought
well
the
be.
pattern.
I'll look. If I email you, it means I looked and I couldn't find it.
Okay, that's fair.
Okay.
So other questions before we start tonight's lesson? Okay, then. So the drill. So give a shout out if you have a question. I can stop the video. And so our first is interlining, and this is where the tool is going to come in. So let's see. Let me turn it on first and see if the sound is coming through. Come on. Oh. Our next step is to back. And the sound is coming through. Yes. Yes. Hello.
Yes.
Oh, good. Thank you. The Guipure lace.
Yes.
With the nylon tool. So you can see here, this is the nylon tool. And the first layer, because we're going to be using two before this is over with, we want the first layer with the lengthwise grain running parallel to the lengthwise grain on the pieces themselves. Now, this particular color, I'm just going to come over here and look at it for a moment. This particular color is called a diamond white. So that is what I'm choosing for the first backing layer for all of this. And really, it's a matter of basting everything together like an interlining. That's really what we're going to be using the nylon tool for. So I will go off camera and sew some basting and bring back the results. As you can see, there's no real right or wrong on basting. You just want these layers to be held together for the next step, which is going to be more hand sewing. So there we have one of the pieces. As you can see here, side back panel, and this is the center back panel. You can see also that we have quite a bit of nylon tulle around. You can trim that off later. Now, one little note on the tool. This is a safety issue. Be sure you keep track of this. If you have a studio that has a polished floor, especially if your floor isn't a dark floor, you can slip and fall if this lands on your floor. So whatever you trim away, be sure to throw it into a receptacle. Don't let it sit on the floor because it could cause you to slip and fall. So I will go off camera, finish basting all of the other pieces, and I will bring back the stack of finished basting. This doesn't have to be pretty, it just has to be basted. So now there's one, and I like to package everything together. So here is one of the sleeves and the other sleeve with all of the other garment sections. So really, this heavy lifting is done for now. You'll be very glad you basted later because our next step is going to be hand sewing the guipure to the tool. Here we have, over here, we have some pieces that I have completed earlier, but what we're seeing here, this is one of the sleeves. You can see the two separate pieces.
Kenneth, at this point, it's just basted, the lace is just basted to one layer of the tulle?
That's correct. And the lengthwise grain on the tool is parallel to the lengthwise grain on the pattern pieces. Because what that does is the lengthwise grain has less stretch than crosswise grain. So the lengthwise grain running vertically is going to stabilize the lace vertically. Now, after we complete the next step, which is going to be sewing the lace to the tool, the second layer, the lengthwise grain is going to run horizontally. And so what that's going to do is it's going to inhibit stretch horizontally on the second layer. So you have the opposing grain lines that are going to make a very stable piece of fabric. It's like basically 3 layers of fabric. Now, Marguerite, you raised your hand.
Yeah, so I'll be cutting mine on the cross grain.
Yes.
Will the first layer be on the cross grain or do I
No,
do it on the length of grain?
Do that on the lengthwise, because how I
Okay.
look upon this is that the lace is kind of like the paint on the wall.
Mm.
The tool is the wall. And so
Okay.
having 2 different layers, you know, the first one is lengthwise grain. The second one, after we've sewn all the lace to the tool, is crosswise grain.
Okay.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. So other questions? Okay. Well, back to the
Yeah,
story. No, go
just
ahead.
one. The
Yes.
lengthwise grain, that's the one you said last time that there were differences visually. Is that the one with the longer diamonds?
Well, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. If you're, let's see. Let's run this back for a moment because I think I have a. Oh, here we are. Yeah. Let me just
white.
Yeah. So if you
So-
look at this, that is the lengthwise grain. The diamonds are longer vertically.
Perfect. Thank
Okay.
you.
And the other way you can tell is if you stretch it, pulling it this way, it's not going to stretch as readily as if you pull it this way. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. So other questions? Okay. So let's run. Okay. So now we're going to be sewing.
Pure to the
And
tool.
again, my apologies for the pronunciation here.
Here we have, over here, we have some pieces that I have completed earlier. But what we're seeing here, this is one of the sleeves. You can see the two separate pieces. So our task here is attaching the lace to the tool. And what you can see, zooming in, you can see there is the stitching line marked in red, and the basting that holds the lace to the tool is in orange. Our task next is going to be tacking the lace to the tool. A lot of work to do, so let's get busy. This is what the work looks like from the back. You can see there's the tool, the lace is underneath, and here again, you can see the red thread tracing for the stitching lines, the orange basting holding everything together. So at this point, we want to get matching thread. So I have threaded a needle with a single strand because you want this to disappear. So really, this is just a matter of stitching the lace to the tool. Now, the thing to remember here is you don't have to put a lot of tension on the thread. You just want to hold everything together. And when you're stitching, you don't want to go right up to where the stitching lines are, about 1.5 inches from the stitching lines. And so you follow the motifs, and there's no actual right or wrong way of doing this. But what you can see here is that that thread somewhat disappears. So I'm going to change now to another sample because I want to show you what it looks like with contrasting thread. So that's what we're going to do next. I've prepared a sample so that I can show you with a contrasting thread what we're going to be sewing. Now you can see here, I have marked out the stitching lines. You can see here, I have sewn the thread basting. So now, just turn this over to the back. So you can see the thread basting here. For the stitching lines, you can also see the basting that we basted the tool to the lace with. Now I'm going to bring in a needle threaded with a contrasting color of thread so you can see how these stitches look in practice. So again, here you can see the thread basting where we know where the seam lines are. Then this is the thread basting that holds the two layers together. And I'm bringing in green thread, and I'm using a single strand because that we don't want it to show. And really, this is not, it's a little tiny stitch. We're sewing the layers together. And so this is where those people who have OCD will really, really be happy. We want to sew pretty much everything down. And there's no real order of sewing that you have to follow. it. The object here is that we want to tack all of the lace to the tool. And you can sort of follow the pattern as it flows. What I would say is don't you don't have to get way up to the stitching lines. You're going to tack everything to about 1.5 inches from your stitching lines on your red thread basting. And so let me sew a little more, and then I'll give you a close-up look to see what you want to achieve here. So yeah, this, you don't want the tension on the stitch to be too tight. You don't want to draw anything up. You just want to secure it to the nylon tool. And again, like I said, there is no real proper right. There's no right way, no wrong way. You just want to have it all anchored so that the tool does not shift. So now let me just sew a little more here. Now you're going to see the thread. So you can see it comes around here. So really, it's not a lot of stitches. The stitches are about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch apart. The thread tension is fairly loose so that you don't draw up the lace. You just tack everything together. And so really, that is what you want to do to all of these different pieces. When you run out of thread, obviously, you would tie it off and trim, clip your thread. So that really is what you want to achieve. And when I show you one of the ones I've sewn with a matching thread, you'll see that that thread sort of vanishes. Okay, so I have finished tacking the lace down. And really, you can just barely see where the stitches go. That is one of the beauties of this. So all of the lace is tacked down. So the next step will be turning this over.
I have a question,
And
Yes,
just before we go on.
Yeah.
You're stitching through roughly the middle-ish of the motifs. You have some sort of thinner bars there. Are you stitching through those as well, or just the major, bigger motifs?
I go through the major motifs.
Okay.
The bars enable me to kind of change course in the pattern if I
Okay.
need to. But if you sew the main, the main motifs, the bars will take care of themselves.
Okay, that's
Okay.
what I thought, but I wanted to be sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Other
Okay.
questions? Is everyone else good?
I got one.
Yes, go ahead.
And it might have been answered. My computer just lagged and
Okay.
Zoom crashed for a second. So maybe you answered this. When you tie a knot with the monofilament,
Okay,
you have any?
I'm not using monofilament here.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I'm
That was,
using just a regular, like a Gutermann. You want it to match, because see, the monofilament is one of those threads that I use when I applique the seams. But on something like this, you don't want the monofilament, because you have a thread end that's going to be facing inward,
right.
which is going to itch like crazy.
Well,
And so yeah, and so that's why I use just a regular, like a Gutermann.
okay. I'm glad I checked. I thought you were just using the green just so we'd see it on camera.
Well,
So,
the green thread is just, to show you the pattern. But I thread matched, I color matched the thread to the gray
okay.
when I sewed the lace down.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So other questions? Okay. So we will continue. The basting.
So that's pretty straightforward. We'll take the orange basting out because, as you can see, we don't really need it anymore because we have tacked the lace itself to the nylon tool. So I will go off camera and remove the basting and bring back the finished result. Now I have final bits of basting removed. So I have this particular piece all sewn. So let's see, when I turn it this way, the two pieces behave as one. Now, as you can see in the pile over here, I have worked ahead. So I will fold this one, put it on the pile. I have one more to go, and then we will be ready for the next step. Now that we have the tool tacked to the lace, our next step is going to be interlining the pieces with the second layer of tulle. Now, to refresh your memory, we put the tulle with the lengthwise grain running lengthwise grain parallel to the lace as everything is cut in the pattern. So our next step, the lengthwise grain is important in that it has less stretch this way. Crosswise grain has more stretch. So now it stands to reason that in our garment sections, if the lengthwise grain runs this way, we're going to have stretch in the crosswise direction. So what we want to do for our second layer of tulle is to run, there we are, to run the lengthwise grain running horizontally. So that will give us stability in the crosswise grain. So we have two layers of tulle that we're going to be interlining this with. The second layer provides stability, and in a moment I'll show you a little further. It also covers the stitches that you used to sew the first layer to. Now, putting the crosswise grain underneath, this is where you can make a decision. You can decide you could use the same layer or the same tool, the same color. It's going to show a little more readily, or you could choose a color. For example, this is sort of a dark green. And again, you want to make sure that the crosswise, there's the crosswise grain. Crosswise grain runs this way. So when we put it underneath the lace, you get a little bit of color showing through. And since it's darker, the first layer of tulle, which is a diamond white, shows up a little bit more. And it gives a little bit of color to the back of the tulle. You could choose this, or you could choose a beige. There's the lengthwise grain. So the beige, you could choose a darker skin tone if you have a darker skin tone. The beauty of that is that if you put the beige underneath, it doesn't read quite so much. It reads more like skin. So you only really see the diamond white layer. So it appears a little more transparent. So these are some aesthetic decisions that you can make. And that's why I showed you the different layers of tool, because it performs two functions. Here I have one of the garment sections laying on the tool. Now you see here, this is the lengthwise grain. So you can see that everything, the grain line, straight of grain, is running on the cross grain. So to recap, the first layer of tool, the lengthwise grain, runs parallel to the grain line on the pattern. The second layer, it runs perpendicular. So this is where we just want to lay out the different pieces on the tool. And once we have them here, I will thread baste the two layers together, and I will come back with the results. This is just a regular tailor baste, and the stitches can be longer or shorter as you see necessary to make the layers stay together. So we're almost finished. So I've gone up one side, down the other. And this basting will remove later.
Now, Kenneth, when you're doing, excuse me, Kenneth, when you're doing this tailor basting,
Yes,
what is topmost to you as the stitcher is the lace itself.
yes,
Underneath is the first lengthwise tool that has been stitched, tacked on invisibly.
yes.
And now under that is this last layer of
That's-
tool.
Yes, that's correct. Absolutely.
Okay, so you're working from the top of the fabric.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Okay.
This is where we will just use the rotary cutter and rough cut all around the edges. Here we have it. And any of these little pieces, like I said before, safety first. Keep track of them, throw them away so they don't cause problems. Next, we'll look at the back of this to see the work. So here, let's just look at the front. You can see there's our tailor basting. And then let's turn this over on the back. Now, the beauty of this, let me zoom in a little bit so you can see it better. The beauty of this is that for the most part, the hand stitching that you sewed the lace to the first layer of tulle with disappears. Also, the second layer, aside from stabilizing everything on the cross grain, the second layer sort of finishes the first. So you don't really have to worry about catching your jewelry or your anything else on the stitching. So this is an interlining, doubled interlining. And so you can see it from this side. And the beige sort of disappears against the skin, the one sheer layer of the diamond white. So now this is the second layer of interlining the tulle. Our next step really, which I will do off camera, is to perform the same operation on all of the different pieces.
I have another question.
Yes.
About how close to the stitching line are you doing the tailor basting with the second interlining
You know,
layer?
the tailor basting can be about 3/4 of an inch away from the stitching line.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Okay.
Finished. Aren't you glad you didn't have to watch me do all this? It would have been like watching paint dry. So here we are, almost done. And again, this basting, you know, there's no real right or wrong. I like to have the stitches about 2 inches apart. So there we are. Now, show you what I have produced while off camera. These are 2 of the garment sections. There we are. That is everything prepared for the next step. And of course, I have just a little bit of the tulle left over.
Okay, Kenneth, I missed something there. I
Okay.
was making some notes and then realized, so now the second layer of tulle crosswise
Yes.
is at the back,
Yes.
and you flipped it over so that loose layer is now facing you.
Yes.
It's been tailor tacked down, but not
Yeah. Tailor basted. Yes.
tailor basted, but not tacked. And
Right.
then you go ahead from the back and you tack it in place. Is that correct?
Well, so what, you know, on this, the final layer, the beige here, that is just basted around the edges. That is not tacked running stitch. That is like
Okay.
you know, think of it as a lining. It's kind of loose.
Okay.
It will get secured when you sew the seams, but that's really all the securing you need to do on the second layer you put on.
Oh,
Yeah.
got it.
You know, because see the point that one of the functions of the second layer is to smooth over any of the hand stitching that you used to sew the first layer. Because
Okay.
you don't want to, you know, like if you're putting it on, you don't want like a button to snag on some of that stitching or to catch it on your jewelry as you're putting it on or anything like that. So, you know, the second layer, aside from stabilizing it in the crosswise grain, it really it finishes off all of that hand stitching.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, so let us
We're going to
finish.
stay the edges.
Okay, so we have all of the fabric prepared now. So questions before we continue, because yes, Michelle.
I have one just because I thought I remember you saying something. You didn't recommend 2 layers of white together because of the cast it produced.
It feels a little dense to my eye, but that's just a personal preference.
My question is, the blue I'm going to use, my mom gave me enough lace that I should be able to, if I'm smart about this, I should be able to get 2 skirt suits out of.
Oh, nice.
Oh, yeah, I was like, thank you, Mom. The blue one I wanted to do with white because not that original. It's meant to be a wardrobe staple for both
Okay.
items. And so I'm like, okay, blue lace with the skirt's going to have white under it as well.
Okay.
The white trim will match. I have to make some decisions before I order any additionals so that I make sure everything coordinates.
Mhm.
But then that would mean that I had planned to put white, and I thought, well, if it doesn't,
Well,
what would you recommend for something to go with the blue without?
well, you know, if you're going to have like a skirt lining or something underneath that, you would just go with the 2 layers of white.
Okay, so it's not like so bad.
Right. Because see, what I was thinking, you know, because like for example, the lady, I think I showed you the video of the lace jacket from my landlady with the pink flowers. You know,
Yeah, that was gorgeous.
you know, she was going to an Orthodox wedding, so she needed coverage. And so we chose that pink because it sort of looked like her skin. And so, you know, that's what I'm thinking. And so for me, for something against skin, the 2 layers of white to my eye looked too dense. But if you're going to be having it against, you know, something that's white underneath.
A shell, a simple knit shell. So,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
okay, perfect.
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure. I was like, maybe I'm thinking about the colors wrong. Maybe I'm not because of that. And I thought, let me double check before I order
Yeah,
anything.
because you see, the thing is, see, this is where, you know, in matters of like design, because I have people say, well, you know, what's the right and wrong? Really, when you're the designer, what you decide goes. And so it sounds like you've decided that you want to wear this, you know, with something white underneath, which would make sense that you would have 2 layers. Because if you had a white and a beige, it would make the white
Yep.
underneath look dirty.
Yeah, it would give a cast. And so then I thought, well, maybe blue. And I thought, but that detracts from the lace because I wanted the white to pop under the lace. And then I
Yeah.
was like, well, I'm not sure that's what he meant. Okay, I'm glad I asked. Thank you.
Okay, so other questions? Okay, so the next step, what we're doing next is, because if you remember in the video, this has the bias binding around, you know, the cuffs and around the edge of the garment. This, what we need to do at this point, while everything is still flat in pieces, is to stay the edges. You know, because we don't want anything to stretch. We want those edges because, see, ultimately what's going to happen, and you'll see this in the video in a moment, is that we're going to be using silk organza. We're going to actually take the stretch out of it, cutting it on the bias. And so the silk organza is going to end up being contained in the binding. But to kind of set everything up so that later you can, you know, you can bind the edge. This is what we're doing in the next video. Okay, so questions before we start? Okay, let's begin. Just bring that down a little teeny bit. Okay. For this particular segment, I think it's useful. And everyone can hear that, yes? Yes?
Yes.
Oh, good, thank you. To start out at the end, to show you really what we wish to accomplish. You can see there is a light colored tape, that's bias tape, on the edges. So there's a way I like to finish the edges to stay them. What you're seeing here is a bias strip. See, this edge of it has been pressed this way. Now, the red thread tracing is the finished edge of the garment. And this organza is cut and stretched on the bias so that it will stay the edge. All of this ultimately, from the red thread out, will be trimmed away, and everything else will be contained in the binding. But I just think it's instructive to show you, before we begin the process, where we're headed with this, so you can understand what our ultimate goal is. Got a lot of work to do, so let's get busy. This is a trick for cutting bias strips that I have used before and I've shown before, but I think it bears repeating here. This is silk organza. We have along the lower edge, this is the lengthwise grain, and I have torn the edge on the crosswise grain, so I know how to get the true bias. So we match up these 2 edges here. So what I will do is go over to the pressing table and press a crease right here and bring back the result. So here we have the organza. This is the true bias. I've pressed a crease. Now, to cut long strips on bias with a short cutting pad, which sometimes I have, you first get it square, and you fold so you can see. I folded it so that I have this here.
So this is the folded edge on the bias. This is 90 degrees. And then I will fold again and line up all of the cut edges. So this is all on the bias. This is the fold. I folded once, folded twice. Now this is what makes it so efficient. The first strip you cut, I'm going to be cutting 1.5 inch wide strips. So the first strip will be 3/4 of an inch wide because that's half of what you finished with. And this could be the one you just throw away if you need to. And from here, the strips cut. And you just continue all the way up. This is fast, it's accurate, and it's space friendly. So I will just continue cutting the rest of these. So here we have the bias strips we need for the next step. In the next step, we're going to be using the pattern. We're going to be shaping the bias strips to that shape. And since they are on the bias, we'll stretch them to remove most of the stretch, but it's much easier to use the patterns rather than the lace. We begin by dampening the bias strip, and I'm going to start at the bottom and work my way up. So you stretch as you pull, and what's going to happen here is that the bias strip is going to get narrower, obviously, because it's biased. So you're going to lose about half your width, but that's okay. So the object here is to get all the stretch out and match the curve. If you get a little bit of bunchiness in here, you can always come back. Flatten it out. So you're going to be ironing this dry. And so let's just put this up onto the paper, because you're going to be stitching it on the edge. So yeah, so you can see here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see what I've done. The object is you want that shaped, and by shaping it, you're going to be removing the stretch, and removing the stretch is what's going to give you the stay. So I will go off camera and shape the other pieces, and I'll meet you back at the work table. So here, you can get a sense of what we're doing. So you can see over on the right, there is a shaped piece of bias. And you can see on the left, I have applied the bias to the front edge. I'm going to zoom in so you can see the object here is we want the thread tracing line, which is going to be the finished edge, centered roughly on the bias. That will set us up for the next step. But we want to stay these edges so that they stay true over the life of the garment. You can see here, I'm roughly centering the bias strip on the thread tracing line. In the final garment, the thread tracing line is going to be the finished edge. And that's why we want to stay that finished edge. There will be a binding later, but we're setting it up to accept that binding now. So I will go off camera because we need to bind the back neck curve and the lower edges of the jacket itself. I will bring back all of the pieces prepared for stitching. And we're finishing up here. So these are all of the pieces on the body. I will be staying the cuffs on the sleeves later after I construct them. So you save more of this for your sleeves later. So now, just show you all of the fronts and backs. So you see, here are the fronts here. That is the back. Those are the side back panels and the side fronts. Next, we go to the sewing machine.
So I'm going to stop here and see if there are any questions.
I have a question, Kenneth. The organza looks pretty thick. Is that 2 layers of it? Is
No,
it folded over?
That's just
That's
one.
one.
That's one. And so when you stretch it,
Uh-huh.
and what it does is it compresses and it gets narrower, so
Okay.
it looks denser.
Yeah, it does look denser.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So other questions?
You're
Marguerite.
not,
So, will the organza act as, I don't know how to say it, will it keep the, charmeuse rounded or have a soft edge to it? Is that another purpose of it?
Well, what this does is this keeps everything from stretching and distorting.
No, I understand that, but
Uh-huh.
secondary, will it keep the edge rounded? You know what I'm saying? So that when it's pressed, it doesn't.
Well, no, actually, when you put the binding on, generally what I like to do with the binding, I'm using a Dupioni, and I actually had it block fused with some fusible tricot. And
Oh,
so
okay.
doing the fusing, it I don't want to say it makes it look padded, but it gives
Yeah,
it
that's
little, it makes it substantial, which is quite nice.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I have one.
Yes, go ahead.
My jacket is going to be beaded, which is very heavy. I don't see this on the shoulder seams. In my case, should I put it? It's going to have to be hand sewn the whole way anyway.
Well, actually, if my sense is you're going to be sewing applique seams, I don't see you putting this on the shoulder seams. I think because on this jacket, if you can make the shoulder seams work as an applique seam, you don't really have to put this on the shoulders.
An applique mean like an epaulette.
Okay, well, so what we're doing, what we're setting this up for, which we're going to be covering next week, is the lace. We don't put a seam in it. What we do is we cut around the motifs and we lay one side over. So it's sort of a complicated version of a lap seam or an overlap seam.
Okay.
And so I would do the same thing at the shoulders for you too.
Yeah.
Did that make sense?
A little bit. It may have to be an actual epaulette, like another piece on the top, maybe running the other way instead of having the beading run down. have it like a square
Okay,
run there, because I'm very afraid it's very heavily beaded
okay.
and it's going to take a lot of weight.
Well, one thing you might consider doing is interlining it with at least one layer of the tool,
Hmm.
because that will help support it.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay. So other questions? Okay. So let us move on.
Start right on the stitching line, a little bit behind, with a standard 2.5 stitch. What you will do is you will sew following the thread basting. Now, a couple of things to know. Make sure that your 2 layers of tulle are kind of out so you don't get them caught here. The other thing to know is if you catch that basting thread, no big deal, because all of this will get concealed in the binding in the final garment. So you notice I'm using a contrasting thread. It will be all good. Okay. You can see here, I've broken my rule. I wasn't paying attention. So what you can do is you go back in and trim that out later if you need to. But yes, I've lost track of the nylon. And sometimes you get it pinned. You catch it when it's pinned. So again, you're seeing my, there we are. So yes, always make sure that the 2 layers are flat. So let me take this out of the machine, show you the result. So yeah, here we are. 1 row of stitching. Next, we will come in and sew an 1/8 of an inch past for the second row. For the second row, I'm using the toe of the foot as my guide, and it will be the same stitch length. So again, look. So now, if you get a little wobble like this, that's not going to kill you, because this will all be contained in the binding. Next, pressing. I will meet you at the pressing table. Next, we want to press that back. Start on this side. We're pressing the silk organza towards the edge. Like so. to know here is that this all will be contained in the binding. So you won't see this in the final product. So here, get a little bit close up here, you can see that that row of stitching is going to be the finished edge. The binding will come out right about to here. So all of this will be concealed in the final garment. I will go off camera and press the rest of the pieces and meet you back at the work table. Back at the work table, we have all of our edges for the bodice stayed. There are the fronts, there are the backs, and then we have all of these folded up in preparation. Now that everything is stayed, we can begin construction.
Okay. So are your brains full?
Full of ideas now.
Yeah.
Like, ooh.
So yes, those are the lessons for this evening. So questions?
Thought of something after you told me about the floating snap.
Mhm.
I saw a video, YouTube somewhere. Somebody had made a simple flange for their zipper in the back. And I thought, what if I made, it still would be the same width. I still wouldn't want to see it from the front, but what if I made, instead of each snap floating, I made a very narrow flange just on the inside so that the snaps wouldn't show.
You could do that too.
Would that work? Okay.
Yeah. You know, that what I do like about the floating snap is, especially because I think I've said this before, I do like those beaded jackets from the 80s, and they all have those little hooks and eyes that are just deadly. And yeah, this is one of those, it doesn't require any kind of heroic effort to just replace the hooks and eyes with the floating snaps. But
Okay.
you know, there are different solutions, and I think
I
the
just-
thing is, you know, what you find most aesthetically pleasing is really what you choose.
To me, it's just a bigger floating snap. It's in my mind, it's still your floating snap. I
Okay.
just was like, oh, there's another way to get more snaps in. Okay.
That's fair.
Thank
Okay.
you.
So other questions?
Yeah, I have a question, Kenneth.
Yes.
I was watching you stitch there. What thread are you using, and what size needle, sewing machine needle, are you using?
Well, let's see. This is just a standard Gutermann thread, and I want to
Okay.
say it's like a 10 or a 12.
Okay,
You know, you know, it's not what you would call the finest needle. It's not the finest thread, but that really is going to be contained in the binding, so you're never going to see it in the finished garment.
does I realize going through lace, going through tulle, that's no Herculean effort for the sewing machine needle. So just a sharp or a universal point or
Just
a
use a
Schmidt,
universal.
universal?
Yeah, I love Schmetz. I use those needles exclusively. I've never had a problem with them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now when working with the monofilament, when we're appliquing everything together, you would use a thinner needle, but we can cover that next time.
Okay.
Okay, so other questions?
Just one question
go ahead.
about the thread. Is there a reason why you don't use Metler? I usually use Metler.
Well, Gutermann is kind of what I can get here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think the thing is use good thread.
Yeah.
Metler's a good thread, Gutermann's a good thread. This is a conversation I have with my students at FIT. They'll get the 10 spools for $1. And I have to just say to them, no, young people, no. You know, because I mean, there are the things that they like, they buy the damn Fiskars plastic handled scissors.
Yeah.
And they show up, and what's so, because it always happens to someone, because when they're doing the welt pocket, you know, I love my little Ganger tailor point scissors because you can cut right up to the point and you can kind of sneak up on it. But what they do with these big old honking scissors is they do this, and so what ends up happening is they cut like an inch past where they're supposed to cut. And then they come up and they're like, Professor, is there any way I can save this? No. And that's when I say to them, okay, do you remember the email where I told you to get the good scissors? And they're like, yeah. I said, okay, you may not come to class with those damn plastic scissors, because if you do next week, I'm taking them. So, good thread, good needles, good scissors. Yeah. So Mettler, I get Gutermann here. I don't really see Mettler in New York. There's my favorite place for thread is called Sill Thread. And what I love about them is they carry like the whole line of Gutermann. So they have the regular, machine sewing thread. Then they have this thing that I call Mara 30, which is, this is a kind of a buttonhole top stitching thread. They have Mara 11, which is really dreamy. And so you can get all of them with the same numbers. So you can get everything to match. So Gutermann is the thread I get. Okay, other questions? Yes, Christine.
So as I watched you with the contrasting threads, so we could see what was the stitching line you put in orange.
Mhm.
We could see that easily. But in doing my own, would I just would I match my lace and tulle as closely as possible? Just, because I'm there working with it, I know that that's
Yeah.
my stitching line.
Right.
And then you stitched, like you caught it, you stitched right on top of it with the first pass,
Hmm.
and then 1/8 inside
Yes,
on the second pass.
that's correct.
With at this point, it is matching thread.
Yeah, you can use matching thread. Yes. I like to use contrasting thread, obviously, because you can see it better in a video. But
Sure, it
when you're
does work.
working in your own studio, any thread you care to use is all good.
Okay.
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 Okay. So other questions? Well, I can tell your brains are full. So, okay. So I'm going to turn the recording off and